Hi guys, a thumbs up for our new members. Kindly welcome to the group and check our other contents on the description box of our various videos that we have done for both sciences and mathematics. So for today, our topic of discussion is going to be under the concept of carbohydrates. It's going to be a short discussion on the different classes of our monosaccharides that we had discussed in our earlier video on introduction to carbohydrates. Now we're going to see that the different ranges of our monosaccharides can be classified or maybe given specific names. And basically for our discussion for today, we're going to see how that nomenclature of the monosaccharides can be able to be achieved. So with that regard, I'd like us to check on our first video as well, so that in collaboration with this one that we are basically trying to do, we can have a deep understanding on other topics that are going to follow under the concept of carbohydrates. So without further ado, thank you and welcome. So after it today is the concept of basically carbohydrates. But under carbohydrates, we're going to look at the classification of monosaccharides. And this is going to give us a basis for understanding other higher forms of these carbohydrates that we have already discussed in our first video. So monosaccharides are basically grouped according to the number of carbons atoms and whether they are poly. Now in our first discussion, we had talked about the concept of polyhydroxyaldehydes, and then we said about the polyhydroxyketones as the broader two categories of these specific compounds we refer to as carbohydrates. Now in the classification of our monosaccharides, we're going to see that it's based on the number of the carbon atoms that are contained in that specific molecule, and whether they are either polyhydroxyaldehydes or polyhydroxyketones. That is basically what the nomenclature is going to assume. And for polyhydroxyaldehydes, we're going to see that they are basically known as aldoses. So for monosaccharides, or maybe the nomenclature of this class of our organic compounds, we're going to see that for this range of polyhydroxyaldehydes, they're going to be referred to as aldoses. And we can be able to see that from these specific names, we're going to get a specific case for the prefix. Basically refers to the concept of aldehydes, and the second one for the polyhydroxyketones, they're going to be referred to as ketoses. And now there is a characteristic ending for oses that we're going to mention later in this particular case, perhaps by giving a range of these organic compounds that we have already mentioned. Now, for instance, if I'm going to give two specific examples for this class of two product categories of the carbohydrates, for naming this, I'm going to give one example to illustrate how we can be able to name the aldoses and the ketoses. So basically, I'm going to do away with this, but bear in mind that we're still dealing with the concept of classification of monosaccharides, or this class of carbohydrates. So in this case, I'm going to draw an illustration. So on my right side of the board, I've given an example of aldose, and this next is an example of a ketose. So basically, this is derived from the polyhydroxyketones, and this the polyhydroxyaldehydes. So in this case, we can be able to see from the structural illustration that this is a functional group for aldehydes, and basically this is a functional group for ketones. And in our nomenclature, we say that for an aldehyde, it forms the carbon forms the first member of that specific chain. So therefore, I've given the Fisher projection for these two specific molecules for aldose and ketose. Now, therefore, we're going to name this carbon from this particular sense using that vertical direction. And on the table that I've given on my right side of the board is going to assist us to name, as we said, nomenclature or maybe naming of the monosaccharides depending on the number of carbons. We're going to list them according to the number of carbons in this specific spaces that I've left there. Now, as we have said, we're going to see that this specific nomenclature is going to assume a form whereby for the aldoses, it's going to have the prefix aldo, and then the next is going to be felt by a specific prefix which is inserted denoting the numbers of carbon. So for 5 we call it the penta or the pent. So it is aldopent, and then since it's aldose, it's going to be the suffix, in this case the prefix is aldo, the suffix mean the middle, which is forming maybe the parent name is the number of carbons, which is pent for 5, and then lastly the suffix is going to be os. So it is aldopentose for 5, and then next we're going to have for the ketose, it is going to be keto for the prefix, and then the number of carbon atoms pent, and then the suffix os. So ketopentose. So the others are going to follow that respective format, where we're going to have aldo exos, hex for 6, os the prefix. Now for this is ketohexose, and then next for 7 it's going to be your hepta, so therefore it's going to be aldoheptose, and this is ketoheptose. For 8 is going to be your oct, therefore it is aldoctose, and this is ketooctose. Therefore, in this specific order, this is the nomenclature of these monosaccharides, in which they are going to fall under the 2 product categories of polyhydroxy aldehyde or polyhydroxy ketones, in those 2 specific orders respectively. So in any case, if you come across a monosaccharide molecule that we are supposed to name, or it has been named using this specific order, then we're going to refer to that specific kind of nomenclature that we have discussed in trying to name it. So basically the main concept that I was trying to derive in this specific discussion is that we have to know the number of the carbon atoms and the prefixes and the suffixes which are used respectively. Now this, for this particular sentence, or the parent name that we are referring to the number of carbon atoms, it follows the normal nomenclature that we have already been using in our organic nomenclature in other videos. So I hope that this is going to assist us in trying to name some of the monosaccharide molecules that we may come across. And in any case, if we have a combination of 2, then we're going to see how that one is going to work. So basically next we're going to look at the feature projection of these specific molecules, and try to see how this specific individual as a chemist try to give a specific naming for these carbohydrates and molecules. So that is it for now. Thank you guys. Bye. God bless you.